If I had to describe the First Descendant in 3 words, those words would be underwhelming, uninspired, and generic. The First Descendant is the latest free-to-play looter shooter in a genre that rarely sees new entries these days, and oh boy, this one is most definitely a game of all time here. This game is said to be like the love child of Warframe and Destiny, and while I haven't played Destiny so I can't comment on any similarities here, but as a Warframe player, this game is nearly identical in its systems and structure and gameplay, and they aren't even really trying to hide it here. So for all you Tenno, strap in for a brief comparison to find out if this game has what it takes to compete with Warframe. And spoiler alert, it doesn't. And if you're wondering why I keep shamelessly cutting to B-roll of some of the content you can find in the game, don't worry about it. The devs know their audience, and so do I, you thirsty This game has parts of it that are good, great even, but it's all dragged straight down to hell by a sea of monotony and boredom that surrounds it. And as more and more games continue to compete for our attention, this one is simply not worth the investment, especially when there are long-standing alternatives that this game is directly trying to compete with that are just better in every way. So today I'm going to tell you about everything the First Descendant has to offer, from its early game to its end game, what's good and what's terrible about it, with the hope to give you some insight into why after over 40 hours I've reached the conclusion that it's a painfully average, soulless product that falls victim to both monotony and repetition. There'll be no spoilers for the main story campaign here, if you even care about that, so if you've played this game or Warframe or Destiny, or maybe you've never even played a looter shooter before, then this video just might interest you, because I'm about to tell you in what's probably way too much detail why this game is a failure in its current state. So without further ado, pull your pants up, wash your hands, and like the video, and maybe subscribe if you want to. I don't know, I'm not your dad. And let's get into why the First Descendant is an underwhelming, uninspired, and generic. Let's start by brushing over the base mechanics and go over in a broad sense what's good and what's bad about the game. Starting with performance, I played on PS5, so I can't speak much for PC or Xbox, but on launch day there were some serious frame rate issues. The game ran horribly and was just choppy as hell. On day 2 they did manage to fix it, but I was hit with server issues and disconnected constantly, straight up until I just couldn't log in for the rest of the day, which was frustrating. But by the 3rd or 4th day, everything was fixed and the game ran perfectly. These issues shouldn't have been there in the first place, but they were fixed quickly, which is worth noting. Now onto the core mechanics. The game as a whole plays really well. The gunplay is excellent, the combat is fast-paced, and mowing down hordes of enemies is very satisfying. The weapon and sound design is good, the hitboxes are tight, and you can equip up to any 3 weapons to swap between. There's no primary or secondary system here. Any 3 guns you own, you can have equipped, which is pretty cool. Traversal is also pretty good. You can jump, double jump, roll to avoid attacks, and you have a grapple hook that can attach to pretty much any surface and catapult you forward. What's here in terms of traversal is solid. I mean, this isn't Warframe movement or anything, but a grappling hook is always going to be fun to use, and getting the hang of it leads to some pretty fluent movement around the map. The traversal in this game feels good, but also rudimentary. It's underwhelmingly simple, and I feel like there could be more here to make it more dynamic, and give more players options to continue your momentum, like a slide or a wall jump for instance. Or maybe I've just been spoiled by Warframe, I don't know. While the gunplay is fantastic and the traversal is great, melee combat has essentially been reduced to one ability that every Descendant has, and it hits like a wet fart and has a lengthy cooldown, making it essentially useless and very boring. There is a mod slot on all your Descendants that's dedicated to modifying this skill, but regardless, it's something I've rarely found useful throughout the game, and is a real waste of potential for combat. Having this ability that's the equivalent of hitting someone with a wet napkin over a fully fleshed out melee system with different weapons and combo attacks that you can acquire is a real waste of potential, and could have expanded the combat and build options for players, and make the game as a whole feel less repetitive. But this game appears to be allergic to doing things like that. Also, the UI is terrible. Like, why is my health bar here? And why is the ammo for the gun I'm using above the health bar and not where the other 2 are? And the ability UI is also way too big and everything just takes up so much of the screen. This might be a nitpick, but it drove me insane for the first few hours of the game. Just give me the options in the settings to move my health bar to the corner where it should be, and shrink the ability display. Thank you for your time. Back to things this game excels at, the gameplay design of the different Descendants is great. First of all, there are 14 of them to unlock on launch here, which is more than expected, and their kits are all unique and offer a lot of variety and build options gameplay wise, and the same goes for weapons too. I haven't played every single character, but the ones I have been incredibly well designed, and all the abilities complement each other and make for a unique feeling kit and playstyle. As for weapons, there's your basic variety of gun types like assault rifles, snipers, shotguns, beam rifles, etc. And different weapons have different rarities going from common to rare to ultimate. Common and rares are dropped from completing missions and killing enemies, and you acquire a shitload of them. Ultimate weapons are more special and have unique special abilities that have to be farmed and crafted, and are generally a lot harder to obtain. So, combat and traversal is great, if not a bit simple in some areas. And the build and gameplay variety between Descendants and weapons is also very good. And those elements are some of the most important things to get right in a looter shooter, and this game absolutely does. But almost everything else around it ranges from average at best to underwhelming to straight up garbage. Starting with the garbage and something that I found extremely disappointing, the story and its characters. No spoilers of course, but there really isn't much of a story worth experiencing here. It's just bad, like really bad. The dialogue sounds AI generated, the characters are all one-dimensional and flat, and the plot is convoluted and generic. I will say the cutscenes where nobody's talking look pretty cool. Like graphically, the entire game looks great. But in this game, the entirety of the early and mid game is going through the campaign, and when it's this horribly put together, it really drags the experience down. The premise of the story is as follows. The Descendants are the protectors of this world called the Ingress, and they're at war with an evil faction called the Vulgus, and in an effort to close the gateway to the mysterious void dimension where the giant destructive colossus emerged from, the Descendants must seek out 3 Iron Hearts, these weird, powerful things that the evil Vulgus commander guy also wants for himself, or else humanity will be destroyed. If that sounded convoluted or confusing in any way, then you see my point. This game also tries to establish characters' personalities and relationships between each other. You talk to a lot of NPCs and Descendants, and have to listen to a lot of dialogue, and I mean a lot, and all of it is painfully bad. The characters constantly regurgitate the same information and over-explain everything like they're talking to a lobotomized toddler with the memory of a goldfish. In between story missions, you usually have to talk to 3 to 4 NPCs in order to advance the story and move to the next region. And every time you do, every single NPC reiterates what the last one said and just repeats shit on top of what new information they're supposed to deliver. I mean, these conversations can last between 1 to 3 minutes, which is just insane. And any dialogue that tries to be compelling or emotional or funny just comes off as cringe and AI generated.
Grandma, when are Mom and Dad coming back? Mom said she'd bring me a birthday present. She hates me, doesn't she? Is that why she left me? And Dad, Grandma, I don't want you to leave me too. I can't even remember what my parents looked like.
There are things to take care of. When exactly will I be able to look for my troop members? An operation?
I can handle it with my arcade! Please, don't shoot! I'm begging you!
Eugen, it's too dangerous!
Whether it's the flat performances or the shitty dialogue, I found myself skipping most of the dialogue by the end of the campaign. This game really does try to tell an epic or compelling story here, but it just doesn't have any redeeming qualities to help it do that. Even from a design standpoint, most of these Descendants are just generic white people with edgy military gear and boring personalities. With the exception of a few characters like Bunny or Ajax, there's just no sense of, oh wow, this guy looks cool, I want to unlock them. Compare this game to Overwatch, a multiplayer shooter without a campaign or a story mode. But its heroes are incredibly iconic and likable, and each character is just oozing with personality through their design and voice lines alone. This game tries to do that here, but the bad dialogue, flat performances, generic design, and any lack of personality just makes it come off as uninspired and boring. In a game about grinding to unlock new characters, the majority of them don't really stand out from one another, in terms of visual design and lore anyways. Fortunately, this doesn't apply to the character's gameplay side of things. They got the important stuff right in that regard. But for a cast of voiced heroes to pick from, the character designs and their personalities are just too generic to be interesting. Having a bad story with weak characters isn't a make or break thing in a game like this, but it is still a huge part of the game's experience, and having a compelling story in an interesting world with characters you actually like does a lot for getting invested in this kind of game, and the First Descendant doesn't have that at all. Anyways, before we get into what the early game is like, let's talk about the super fun part of live service games that, let's face it, if you know Nexon, then you knew this was going to be spicy. The microtransactions. That's right, everybody's favorite part of
Modern gaming.
and here they're more predatory than ever. For this part, I think a direct comparison to Warframe is warranted, because how the microtransactions are implemented here is nearly identical to Warframe, except more expensive and more predatory in every way. Let's start small and ease you into it here. There is a battle pass. Shocker, I know, but I don't actually have a problem with it. It costs 500 caliber, which is equivalent to 14 bucks Canadian, and I'm personally sick of every game and its mother having a battle pass, but it's almost always a decent deal at the very least. And in this one, you get 300 of the 500 currency back, which is cool, I guess. Not for me, but for someone out there, I'm sure. Anyway, let's get deeper into the ball pit here. Like Warframe, the First Descendant is pay to progress, meaning you have the option to skip the grind to unlock stuff like Descendants, their ultimate versions, and key resources if you want to whip out your wallet and save some time. And personally, I don't have a problem with this form of monetization, but it becomes problematic when the quote-unquote grind is so bad it's directly made to drive you to the shop instead of playing the game. But this isn't a PvP game, so someone else paying for stronger items doesn't necessarily affect you in a significant way. In Warframe, you can straight up buy the frame you want, if you don't want to spend however many hours farming it. But odds are, the majority of the frames are very reasonable to farm, and spending that plat is almost never worth it. First Descendant does price his characters according to how tough they are to farm, which Warframe also does. Buying a Warframe that's obtainable in-game for a scalable degree of grind costs between 75 and 375 platinum, depending on how hard it is to unlock them. And these prices directly reflect the in-game purchase options for platinum, and wonderfully. First Descendant, this range is between 300 to 900 caliber, which follows a similar pricing range, except 300 caliber just happens to be 50 above the 699 option to purchase it. 600 caliber is coincidentally 100 above the 1350 option to purchase it. Thankfully, the 900 option is at least below the $30 option, but potato potato. This may or may not become a trend in the shop here. Do you want this starter pack that costs 750 caliber? Well, guess what? You have to buy $30 worth of currency to get it. How about these ultimate Descendants? The upgraded premium versions of these heroes that are obtainable for free in game, but just happen to be absolutely excruciating to farm. And I'm talking 3% drop chances for some of these parts. But if you want to skip that and unlock an ultimate Descendant right now, you have to spend a minimum of 3,000 caliber, which, oh wait, the $65 option for 2,750 isn't enough. Looks like you'll have to spend $93 on the next one up. Or for an absolute steal, you could up it to 5k for some extra stuff and spend $140. Nexon, have you smoked an entire batch of crystal meth and lobotomized your entire staff? At least have the decency to offer an option to buy the right amount of currency. In Warframe, Prime Resurgence offers a single Prime Warframe for 30 bucks, and that also comes with 200 platinum baked into the offer. And you can also get a $50 version of this bundle that comes with some cosmetics and resources and an additional 200 platinum, making 400 total. Comparing these two identical forms of monetization really puts things into perspective here. Warframe is a game that promotes consumer-friendly monetization practices, and does everything it can to make spending money feel worth it, while the First Descendant, on the other hand, uses every anti-consumer practice in the book, with deceptive currency purchase options, ridiculously overpriced ultimate bundles. And I haven't even talked about cosmetics yet. Oh, do you want this neat bunny skin of her in a skimpy maid costume that you're too embarrassed to explain why you want? First of all, perv. But also, that will be 750 caliber. Oh wait, we've been here before. There's no 750 option. Guess you have to get 1,000. Or how about this premium limited edition bunny skin for 1900 caliber? Of course there's a fear of missing out tactic here. Why shouldn't there be? Well, regardless, get ready to spend $60, which is $10 more than Elden Ring's DLC, by the way. And it's 800 more currency than you need, cause that's the only way you can get this skin. Oh, and it gets better. Let's talk about paint colors. Do you want to make your character blue? Okay, then just buy blue for 25 caliber. Easy, right? Yeah, it's easy, except it's a finite consumable, and you're only paying to use that color once. So every time you want to change the color of something, it's going to cost you a couple of dollars, even if it's the same color. If you want to make every part of your character blue, you have to buy blue 6 times. In Warframe, if you spend $8, you get an entire palette of every imaginable shade of color you want, unlocked forever, and can be used on anything customizable. There is no possible good reason on this godforsaken planet that buying the color red in a video game should be something you have to do more than once in the same game. Fuck you, Nexon. And I haven't even gotten to the biggest difference between these two games yet. In Warframe, you can trade platinum to other players, which means that you can earn the premium currency for free in unlimited amounts. So not only is everything in the First Descendant's shop filled with predatory prices, FOMO skin offers, and aggressively overpriced bundles, but it also left out its competition's most consumer-friendly system that not only gives an incentive to play the game and creates a consumer-friendly ecosystem, but makes things you actually do need to progress in the game that cost premium currency obtainable for free. In both Warframe and the First Descendant, Descendant slots, weapon slots, and every other inventory slot can be increased with Caliber and Platinum. And you do get more inventory slots with each Mastery rank, but that ends at rank 30. And you only get 10 Descendant slots, so if you want to collect every character, no matter what, you're gonna have to dish out some money. Warframe has this system too, but you can trade, so you can still very reasonably collect everything you want and not spend a single dime. So in short, fuck you, Nexon. The First Descendant uses every anti-consumer trick in the book to get you to spend money. Where Warframe is a game that respects its player base and has fostered an ecosystem that doesn't nickel and dime its players, the First Descendant took this model and ignored all the good parts of it, and produced a shop that attempts to abuse its player base more than Activision Blizzard abuses its employees. Okay, angry microtransaction rant over. Now let's get into the new player's experience and the early game. When starting the game, you get to pick your First Descendant, no pun intended. And you can either pick NITPICK, an explosive expert with a grenade launcher for an arm, Viessa, an ice lady, and Ajax, your tank archetype. You start with a brief tutorial mission that acclimates you with the combat and traversal, and you get an introduction to the story and some key characters. And then after that, you're thrown into the hub area of the game, Albion. And here you find all your different vendors and terminals to access all the different systems and content in the game. And after talking to a few NPCs, you are dropped into the first area of the game, Kingston. And here is where you're introduced to the main gameplay loop. Your through-line progression route consists of making your way through the star chart, the Ingress. And in each biome of the Ingress, there are multiple subregions that are essentially small open worlds that you can run around. You need to complete anywhere between 2 to 5 open world missions in each of them, along with what are called operation missions, which are essentially story-based missions set in a linear dungeon-style tile set. The open world objectives here are functionally pretty well designed. Each one plays well within the landscape, and other players can join in seamlessly at any point throughout the objective and help you out. But for how many of these that you end up having to do, there are simply just not enough objective types. It gets repetitive real quick. On top of the main missions in every region, there are also some side objectives you can do for some decent gear as well. But they don't offer much in terms of variety, as they very much just feel the same. So in order to progress, you have to do all of these normal open world missions in every region, and then complete your 2 operation missions in between and clear all of Kingston. And it's at this point you're introduced to Void Intercept missions, where in the mysterious dimension called the Void, sounds familiar, you have to take down a Colossus, which are these huge tough bosses that present a real challenge later on in the game. And once you take down the Colossus, you can then advance the story and progress to the next area. These Void Intercept missions are by far the absolute standout piece of content in the whole game. There are a variety of bosses, and most of them are incredibly well designed and very fun to fight. Each one has different resistances to different elements and body parts that you can break off in order to weaken it, which can alter your strategy when trying to take one down. In the mid game, these also become a serious gear check as the difficulty really ramps up, and you have to really get a grip on the progression systems in order to be strong enough to face these guys by that point. These Void Intercept missions are also where you open what are called amorphous material patterns, which are basically crates that you have to open by killing the Colossus that is tied to. When you open one of these, you have a chance to get either a weapon part, a Descendant blueprint, or some other valuable items. Okay, they're basically relics from Warframe. And these become a lot more prominent towards the endgame, as this is where you get majority of your endgame weapon parts and Descendant parts. And we'll get to that later. So the core gameplay loop throughout the campaign is doing your 2 to 5 open world missions in each region, doing your 2 story operation missions in between, and killing the Colossus, and then advancing to the next biome and doing that all over again with higher leveled enemies who drop higher leveled gear. And all this with story beats, character dialogue, and cutscenes in between. Does that sound like it could get a little repetitive? Because it absolutely does. The objectives of the open world missions begin to grow stale after a bit, and enemies don't really change much either. There are 3 different factions of enemies, but they all feel the same to fight. You have your standard evil military legion, a robot legion, and an organic monster legion. Sounds familiar. But majority of them just boil down to cannon fodder. There are some tougher enemies like ones with shields, guys that shoot laser beams, etc. that do shake up the gameplay a bit. But between the different factions, not much really changes in terms of how you fight them. While the open world objectives are well designed enough, they are quite literally the entire game. Even in operation missions, it consists of just doing these same objectives except in a linear tile set instead of an open world. By halfway through the game, they've already become monotonous and repetitive. The only thing that kept me engaged here was the core gameplay. Killing hordes of enemies was just simple fun, and the Descendants I was using had incredibly fun ability kits. The Colossus bosses were also a positive for me, and managed to somehow break the monotony. But as for the rest of the game, it just doesn't evolve or change as you progress. The gear numbers just get higher, and everything becomes a very repetitive slog by even halfway through the campaign. Each of the regions you explore look very good graphically. There are a variety of biomes like the Agna Desert, the Echo Swamp, or the Highlands Vesper region, but they're also so generic in their design. All of these regions boil down to simple and generic renditions of different biomes that look like they're pulled straight out of Google Earth. You can run around a generic desert, or a boring swamp, or an empty plains field. And if you're not on a mission, there is absolutely nothing to do in these open worlds. They are lifeless. In terms of art style, there's also nothing very stylized here. There's no unique environmental storytelling going on, or anything in these areas that makes them feel alive, or like it's a part of an interesting world that's supposed to be at war with another dimension. Again, graphically, these areas are gorgeous, but that fidelity is used on generic, lifeless landscapes that lack any detection of creativity or imagination. It's all just so uninspired. These areas look like places you'd find in the real world, rather than a dystopian sci-fi land caught in an interdimensional war. Everything feels so creatively bankrupt, like there's no passion or imagination here. It's just underwhelmingly mediocre, as if it were the bare minimum in order to get you through the door and into the store. Well, how about power progression? The entire point of a looter shooter is grinding to become a powerhouse, and if that experience isn't good, then the whole game can fall apart. Well, one thing this game does incredibly well is teach you its mechanics and systems to new players. And there's a lot of complicated shit here to unpack, and the game does a phenomenal job of easing you into it. Your overall account progression is tied to your mastery rank, which goes up to mastery level 30, sounds familiar. And as you level up each mastery rank, the game teaches you about the different systems one by one through short side quests and this tutorial bot on Albion. And this guy would be way more effective if he didn't skip through his paragraph long explanations of key game systems in like 0.5 seconds. Like seriously, you have to be a robot yourself or have the ability to freeze time in order to read everything he spits out fast enough. Anyway, what this robot first attempts to teach you is your main way of powering up your weapons and descendants, which is mods. Sounds familiar. And mods drop from both enemies and mission rewards, and your descendants mod capacity increases as you level up, and later on in the game you can double your capacity with what's called an energy activator, sounds familiar. And also using a crystallization catalyst, you can apply polarities to mod slots that half the capacity of the mod if the symbols match, also sounds familiar. Gear is another set of equipable stat buffs that can give you skill power, defense, health, shield, etc. And you get a shit ton of these, as well as weapons from both enemy drops and mission rewards. And when it comes to leveling up both your gear and your weapons, you essentially just have to get a bunch of drops from enemies and missions, and sift through the boatload of useless shit and find the ones with the higher numbers, which is tedious. I personally don't enjoy having to sift through a mountain of gear after every few missions. But back to the early game, throughout your first region, you also will get all the parts you need to craft Bunny for free. And as part of a side mission, you're taught how to research shit at the vendor Anais, as well as how your ultimate weapons work. As you progress through the different regions and hit higher master ranks, you're also introduced to weapon transmissions, which is how you level up ultimate weapons, by combining it with either common or rares to match its level. There are also weapon adjustments, which let you re-roll a set of stats on your weapon, and reactor enhancements, which buff the stats of your reactor gear pieces. Now all this is fine and dandy here, but the special ability that each ultimate weapon has can also be upgraded too, except in order to upgrade it you need a duplicate of that weapon to do it, which means if you want to max out an already rare and difficult to get weapon, you have to farm it 5 times total, which is a lot of times, man. And this is just an unnecessary grind to implement, and is a red herring to some of the grind this game wants to put you through later on. Something that could have easily been made another upgrade material that you have to craft is now a tedious and repetitive grind. It's hard enough as it is to get a lot of the ultimate weapons in the game, and having to do it 5 times per weapon in order to max it out is just absurd. But other than that, progression feels pretty good. Descendant progression and the mod system in general is great. There are a lot of different mods that you can make builds with and experiment with, and hey, if it works well in Warframe, then it works here too, because it's practically identical. But back to your main progress route. You make your way through the regions, doing your open world objectives, your story operations, and finally your Void Intercept missions. And with this point, you have the option to farm up some new descendants and weapons as you complete more regions. The descendants whose parts drop from operation missions are far easier to farm than the rest of them, and you have a decent chance of getting those parts, and they come already built, meaning you don't have to farm the resources to craft each individual part in order to craft the character. And one thing this game does that I must applaud it for is having all the information that you need to know where to farm everything easily accessible in the game. If you want to know how to farm Blair, for instance, all you have to do is go to the research lady and look at Blair's parts, and it'll tell you the exact missions you need to do, and you can even waypoint it from right there. Because for the rest of the descendants that aren't farmed from operations, you have to get the blueprints for each of the parts in either more difficult missions, side content, or amorphous patterns, which notably takes significantly longer to farm. As you progress into the higher level regions, the difficulty begins to steepen. At around gear levels 40 to 50, your mod and builds will start to matter more as the content gets noticeably more difficult, which feels just right for around the mid game. There's a side quest that introduces you to energy activators, which allow you to double your mod capacity, as well as a side quest that guides you to do encrypted vaults, which get you the materials that you need to make these energy activators. And these just absolutely suck to do. Finding a vault consists of walking around any chosen open world region, and just hitting the scan button every 2 seconds and listening for a beeping sound, and you have to follow the sound until you find it. Now, not only is this immediately boring and tedious, but it's also not very rewarding. You have to do a lot of these to get the materials you need for just one catalyst or energy activator. You do also get these rare materials you need for mission rewards, but again, you don't get a lot of them. The grind for these 2 items is unreasonably long for 2 essential upgrade materials that are a massive boost to power in the game. And making the steps to get these parts extremely tedious and annoying just makes the whole experience 10 times worse. Another mission type you have access to after completing each region are special operations, which are basically endless type missions where you take on hordes of enemies and get better rewards the longer you last. And endless missions like these are a test of endurance and are a great way to push builds to the limit before you gain access to the endgame content, and earn decent loot while you do it. Well, this certainly doesn't break up the monotony of the gameplay loop because it is just more of the same mission types, but it is enough to warrant its inclusion. These missions are a different type of difficulty that permits things like challenge runs, build showcasing, and endurance runs for players who want that extra challenge. And since it's completely optional, there is really nothing bad to say about these missions in particular. Anyway, as you work through your main campaign, clearing all the regions and going from gear levels 50 all the way through 90, you finally reach the final area called Fortress. After running through a dozen areas that look straight out of Google Maps, your mind might begin to wonder, what will this final area of the game be like? The home of the Vulgus. Maybe it's this huge, sprawling, dark sci-fi castle, or an expansive, grungy landscape that looks like Mordor but more futuristic. Well, you get snow. Just snow. So after clearing this final area and finishing the last operation of the campaign, the story and the horrible nightmare of bad dialogue and cringe is finally over, and now you're ready for the endgame. So, what is the endgame like? After all, if this game can manage to produce new, engaging endgame content that breaks up the stale repetition you've experienced up to this point, then there might be something salvageable here. Well, get ready for the exact opposite, because guess what? Everything you just did, you get to do again, but this time it's a little harder. Once you complete the campaign, you unlock hard mode, where all of the missions are scaled up to level 100 with better rewards and new descendants and ultimate weapons to unlock. The biggest additions to hard mode are operation missions and new Colossus fights. There are 2 new Colossus bosses to take on here, along with some higher level versions of some of the normal mode ones. Infiltration operations have some bigger changes though. In hard mode, these missions track your team's kill score, and by the end of the mission, determine your odds to get better rewards. There are also personal debuffs that you can equip in order to gain a higher score multiplier. Things like minus max health will make the mission harder, but will ultimately be more rewarding. But that's kind of it for the endgame. Nothing else changes, there's nothing new. By this point, you're supposed to just farm for all your ultimate descendants and late game weapons, but that process is just doing the same missions with the same objectives that you've already been doing for the entire game. And that is not an endgame that can keep players interested. The best parts of this game do shine through in the endgame though. Building your characters and weapons does feel good, and making those optimal endgame builds that can nuke entire rooms is at the very least fun. There's just no content that's fun to use it in. Grinding through over 30 hours of a shitty campaign, repetitive missions, and empty worlds, only to be rewarded with the opportunity to do it all again, is just absolutely awful. And if you do want to unlock those ultimate descendants and endgame weapons, then the grind will only get steeper from here. And that is a huge disappointment. The goal of any live service game is to keep you coming back to it. And for looters in particular, the most important part of doing this successfully is finding that balance between grind and reason. How much of a grind is it to get something, and how rewarding does getting it actually feel? Will running the same mission for 6 hours straight, only to be rewarded with a high five and a moist towelette, really feel rewarding, or will it result in player burnout? How long something should take to get is difficult to say. Being able to farm an ultimate descendant in 5 minutes would diminish the value of it and not feel very rewarding. But on the other hand, having to endlessly farm for days to get it is oppositely evil and not very much fun. A game is supposed to be fun after all. Bottom line, the grind needs to feel fair. You should be able to get what you want before you burn out, but not so easy that it doesn't feel earned. Warframe over the years has done this quite well, Base frames and even primes are very reasonable to farm. A lot of ones that rely on RNG have pity systems in place, and the ones that don't can be farmed regardless in under 2 hours. And the same goes for everything else in the game. There are still some farms remaining that toe the line closer to burnout worthy, but overall the balance is pretty good. But the First Descendant must have skipped this page when they copied Warframe's homework. Essential resources like energy activators are extremely difficult and tedious to get. And Ultimate Descendants, oh boy, you're better off looking for Atlantis because the odds of going there would be easier than getting an Ultimate Descendant for free. Parts for Ultimate Descendants could have drop chances as low as 3%, and these are all from amorphous patterns, which means first you have to farm up the patterns, and then do a 10 to 15 minute Colossus fight, all for a 3% chance to get what you want. Times that by the 4 parts you need and you have yourself an insanely unreasonable grind that nobody who enjoys having their sanity would put themselves through. This game is simple in its design. Just do everything possible to get players to give up and end up spending money in the shop. I also have a list of nitpicks that I wasn't sure where to fit in this video, and all of these kinda just piled up into this big well of frustration, and range from sizable issues to tiny nitpicks that are smaller than my patience level, so enjoy. Number 1. Too many mini-bosses have invulnerability phases where you shoot stupid floating balls. Some of these balls regenerate if you don't shoot them in the right order, and I don't know if it's intentional or a bug, but like every single boss has these and it's just annoying as fuck and not fun at all. Please delete, I'm so sick of these. Number 2, there's no invulnerability window when you get revived, which leads to this. Number 3, the Colossus boss the Devourer should not be able to regenerate all of his health and his shields. That shit is dumb, I ran out of time nearly every run. Number 4, while we're here, the time limit on Colossus fights as a whole should be longer or removed completely. It's dumb. Number 5, mentioned this already, but the tutorial bot talks way too fast. I'm not a robot, I can't read that fast. Number 6, there are also no UI customization settings. This shit takes up half my screen. Number 7, running back and forth across the entire hub to different vendors is annoying. I miss my orbiter. Number 8, also throughout the entire game, the mouth movements on characters are not synced with the dialogue. It looks real goofy. Number 9, also you can only research 5 items at a time at the research lady. Why? There's already a long timer for most of the things here. At least let me craft as much shit as I want at the same time. Number 10, another thing. Why does your character have voice lines in the tutorial mission, but it just stops after that? I mean, why do it at all if your playable character isn't at least gonna throw out some one-liners every now and then? Number 11, this one gets real nitpicky here, but if the guide is an AI that is within every descendant's mind, then why does she act like her physical manifestation or whatever is actually physically here in the world? She'll be like, Descendant, meet me over here. I must speak to you. Like, bitch, you're in my head. Why do I have to run over to you just up here? Number 11, is the first boss of the game really named Greg? Number 12, also, Greg has a bunch of clones? Number 13, story spoilers here I suppose, but you don't actually fight Corel, the villain of the game in the campaign. He just kinda leaves and then acts like he's gonna be DLC or some shit. Lame. Now for the real question all you Tenno here have been wondering. Is this game better than Warframe? Well, if you haven't clued in by now, absolutely not. This game really does shamelessly copy Warframe's homework. I mean, from mods to mastery ranks, forma, reactors, how you craft characters and weapons. Like, almost everything is just Warframe, but worse. There is one thing, however, that this game does better than Warframe. The onboarding experience is significantly better. Where Warframe struggles to teach new players its mechanics and systems, and has a real lack of direction and guidance in the early game, the First Descendant is excellent at slowly introducing systems, explaining how they work and why they're important. And you don't have to look up on third-party websites where to farm something. The game just tells you. For all its flaws, you don't need a wiki or a build guide or another tab open to play this game, and in Warframe you most certainly do. But other than that, Warframe is kilometers ahead in every other way. Story and world building, leaps ahead, it's not even close. Mid to end game content actually changes the gameplay loop significantly and introduces tons of new and different content. In Warframe, there's a Nemesis boss style system, a spaceship combat mode, a whole Souls-like open world content island, a dozen different faction hubs to progress through, and so much more that you gain access to as you go deeper and deeper into the game, where the First Descendant in its entirety is doing the same thing over and over again, becoming monotonous and repetitive. Warframe has a dozen different things that you can do at any time that are all completely different from one another. If you're tired of the base gameplay loop, you can just go experience a completely different one within the same game. Yes, Warframe has had 11 years to turn this game into what it is today, and sure, the First Descendant might be as good or even better in 11 years from now, but who cares? Why should you, the consumer, care if it will improve down the road, when a superior product is better right now? This game shouldn't be judged on how good it can be. That's irrelevant. It should be judged on what it is now. And what it is now isn't bad, but it's also inferior to Warframe. Warframe hits a point that just hooks you in a way that you don't expect it to. For most people, it's the second dream. Warframe has the sauce, and the First Descendant is really missing that. Character kits and designs in both games are admittedly pretty good, and the 14 Descendants are probably better designed than at least 10 to 15 of the Warframes in the game that have yet to be reworked. But Warframe also isn't clawing at your wallet trying to squeeze every dollar possible out of you. It has its fair share of microtransactions, but player-to-player trading and consumer-friendly practices makes Warframe a game where people want to spend money just to support it. And the same just can't be said about the First Descendant, because overall it just has nothing on Warframe. And if you're wondering which of the two you should play, just pick Warframe. It's better. Overall, the First Descendant does some things pretty well. At its core, it has great combat, great traversal, and great character design. But everything else is just generic, monotonous, and unimaginative to a painful degree. This game just has no soul. Everything here you've seen before, but done better. Think about what I've said in this video. I've gone over the entire game, and at any point have you thought, oh wow, that looks cool, I want to do that. There's just nothing in this game that makes it stand out from Warframe or Destiny. There's no X factor here that puts it above the others. It doesn't have the sauce that just hooks you like Warframe does. It just feels like a hollow excuse to sell shit in a shop. There's a solid foundation here of core mechanics and gameplay, and maybe in 2 years this game will have something to offer. But I can't judge this game 2 years from now. You can sit here and say that Warframe and Destiny have been out for over 10 years, and they've had time to make the games good. But that doesn't really matter. The only thing that does is what's here today, and right now the First Descendant is simply not good enough. But yeah, I think that more than sums up my thoughts in this game. I've been making videos for about a month now, and I've really been enjoying it. My goal for the near future, anyway, is to just improve the quality of my content with every video, and I think I'm doing that so far. It's not where I want it to be just yet, but the more I do it, the better I will get, I suppose. If you're still here, thanks for watching and for sticking around. Maybe drop a comment and tell me what you thought of the video. And if you agree, disagree, or have any thoughts on what I said about the game, then tell me about that too. Also, if any Destiny players are here, I am pretty curious about the similarities between that and the First Descendant. Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks for watching, and consider liking and subscribing if you want to support my tiny little baby channel. And look out for more from me in the future. That's it. Bye.